Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jamil Andolini. I'm the Regional Director for Politico here in Europe, and I'll be your moderator for this next session. We're talking about all the single markets, whether we can see greater union, ever closer union in Europe, or more fragmentation. I moved to Brussels about 4 years ago, and my observation when I first arrived in the capital of Europe, in the heart of Europe, was that at any one time, Europe is both under these centripetal forces and centrifugal forces, both pulling apart and growing closer and closer together, all at the same time. I found it absolutely fascinating, and that has been my sort of scaffolding, intellectual scaffolding in the last 4 years that I've been living and working as a journalist and a media leader in Brussels. So we have today a really, truly brilliant panel, which is going to help us talk about this topic of fragmentation or closer and closer union. It couldn't be more timely. It couldn't be more important for the future of Europe, for the future. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jamil Andolini. I'm the Regional Director for Politico here in Europe, and I'll be your moderator for this next session. We're talking about all the single markets, whether we can see greater union, ever closer union in Europe, or more fragmentation. I moved to Brussels about 4 years ago, and my observation when I first arrived in the capital of Europe, in the heart of Europe, was that at any one time, Europe is both under these centripetal forces and centrifugal forces, both pulling apart and growing closer and closer together, all at the same time. I found it absolutely fascinating, and that has been my sort of scaffolding, intellectual scaffolding in the last 4 years that I've been living and working as a journalist and a media leader in Brussels. So we have today a really, truly brilliant panel, which is going to help us talk about this topic of fragmentation or closer and closer union. It couldn't be more timely. It couldn't be more important for the future of Europe, for the future of Ukraine, for the future of the transatlantic alliance, and in terms of Europe's place in the world, vis-a-vis the rising authoritarian countries and the, let's say, modifying world order that we're seeing at the moment. So to join me on the stage, I'd like to invite first Madame Christine Lagarde, who is obviously the head of the European Central Bank, very well known to everybody, I'm sure. I'd like to invite the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kristen Michal. Please, sir. I'd like to invite the Minister for Digital and State Transformation, Carsten Wilberger. Please, sir. And my good friend, author, intellectual, academic, Anu Bradford, author of The Brussels Effect, to join us, and professor at Columbia University. Hi, Anna. So, as I mentioned, in my reading of things, we have both the pulling apart forces, things like Brexit, things like Hungary, other countries that are sort of, and frankly, perhaps the United States, forces that are driving Europe apart, that are trying to force the union to collapse, break apart. And at the same time, we have these forces that are also pulling Europe ever closer together. Things like the war in Ukraine, things like the, I would say, the COVID crisis, the pandemic. And these forces are working together simultaneously. And one of the jobs of a journalist in Brussels who's trying to sort of tell everyone what's really going on is to understand which is in the ascendant and which is in recession. So I want to ask the panel, just very briefly to begin with, what would you say? Are we in the moment of ever closer union, things pulling together, Europe becoming more federal, if you like, or are we seeing at the moment a period of more disintegration? Maybe I'll start with the Estonian Prime Minister, sir.
Yes, thank you. Good day, everybody. To be honest, we have both of them in Europe because we just had European Council, and I would say that different crises, security, economic situation and everything is saying that we should be closer together. We need better cooperation. We need things much more simple than today, but at the same time we can see that there's a lot of parties and a lot of politicians taking lead in this kind of your own country, your own site first politics. So we have both, and it's not clear which one will win. But right now I would say that we will come out of this crisis, for example, of the security situation stronger than we used to, because if I look at the coalition of willing, Europe acting together behind backing up Ukraine, to be honest, this team is much more impressive than it was a year ago. We are stronger, not weaker. But it's still up to us how it will go.
Thank you so much. Madame Lagarde, you obviously run the European Central Bank, which is a model, an example, a sort of symbol of ever closer union, monetary union. But would you say, from your perspective, you've been a politician, you've been run a multilateral organization, do you think Europe is in a centrifugal or centripetal period?
I would say two things, Jamil, and thank you very much for having us. Good morning to all of you and for still being here on a Sunday morning. It's brilliant. I would say two things. First of all, if you read Jean Monnet, if you read Schuman, if you read the founding fathers, they all say the same thing. Europe grows in times of crisis. Europe is stronger, gets better together in times of crisis. You've mentioned two crises. I would add a third one, which is the kick in the butt that we all received as a result of President Trump's change of attitude towards Europe. And I'm not being dismissive, I'm just saying this is what is happening at the moment, and it does bring the leaders of Europe, the policymakers, much closer together. That needs to continue. Point number one. Point number two, markets do not always get it wrong. And if I look at the amount of money that is being invested by the venture capitalists in particular at the moment, in those key sectors where price-earning ratios, where price-to-book value is massively increasing, the money is coming.
I think that's a very, very important point. I meet with the heads of some of the world's largest hedge funds relatively often, and it's fascinating for me to hear how bullish they are on the euro, on the markets. But can I push you a little bit, since you've brought it up as a topic? What else does Europe need to do to ensure that we here in this wonderful continent can attract more capital? Because it is just a fact that so much European capital goes to America, gets invested in public markets, sometimes in private markets, and a lot of that capital then gets recycled back through the private equity funds or the venture capital funds back into Europe, which then those companies, those innovative, very innovative companies, end up then listing on American stock markets. So I was talking to a central banker in Europe, and they suggested what we need is a tax on capital trying to leave Europe towards America. But tell me, what else do we need to do?
Tell me who this guy is.
Might not be a guy. I don't want to be, we shouldn't be sexist. Might not be a guy.
Central bank in Europe, it has to be a guy, unfortunately. I like them all, and don't get me wrong. So 3 points. One is, as I said, innovation is really up and coming, and the VCs are seeing it clearly. Second, there is diffusion. There is a very good study that is done annually by the European Investment Bank. 37% of companies in Europe are adopting AI and Gen AI in their production process. Exactly the same, actually a little more, a tad more than the US companies in terms of diffusion and adoption. And the third one is that the domestic market is waking up. If I look at growth last year, it was only 1.5%, but it was all consumption and investment. Export was a negative contributor. Now, to your point, should we have a tax? Should we have an incentive? I'm more in favor of the incentive, not of the tax. That's my view. I think it works better. I think when you want to attract money in, you don't want to lock it in. You want to attract it inwards. And I'm not going to mention the infamous CMU, Capital Market Union, but I can see policymakers, you and all your colleagues, now being a bit serious about it and saying saving, investment union, pension fund that are operating in a different way from what they are at the moment, common supervision, and a few other things, including securitization. This is coming in 2026. So it's not something that we dream about, that we talk about, have been talking about for 10 years. It is coming in 26.
You're saying that 2026 we will see the Savings and Investment Union, which is the rebrand of the Capital Markets Union.
Yeah, you're right. Not all of it, because it's a staggered approach, and you need to make sure that supervision is much better harmonized. How they go about it is to be determined, but it's on the checklist of things to do in 2026. The second one is transformation of the pension financing, with a much more hybrid system to make sure that the money is actually in and invested in Europe. And securitization, which is something that the banks have been longing for, that will also be on the list of the 26 success. So I'll come back in 27 to let you...
You heard it first here, and I'll see you on the stage next year, and I'll hold you to that. You wanted to jump in very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. I absolutely do agree with Madame Lagarde that you cannot put the border to the capital because it's like a river. I come from a small country and I know that if you want to keep the best brains, best technologies inside, you have to have these kind of conditions that everybody stays there. And that's why European tech companies are better off in US and Asia, because it's much simpler, less rules, everything works much better and faster. That is European problem, not too few taxes. That is not the problem. We need simple, more digital environment. That helps.
Minister, back to my opening question. Would you say that Europe is in a phase of growing closer together, more European Union, or more national sovereignty at the state level, member state level?
Well, thanks first of all for having us, and good morning, everyone. I'm more on the positive side. So I think...
What's positive? Depends on your perspective.
No,
positive ever closer union
Europe,
or fragmentation?
Obviously closer union. I'd like to understand which member state believes in this geopolitical situation where scale matters, where speed matters, can play a role of significance in this world without being united. The things I think with Europe is we're approaching this very much again from the defensive side. There's pressure coming, and that's important, that's a good force. But we should also turn the conversation into the offensive side. We have so much to offer. And my view is the biggest risk is we have overdone it with regulation. We've overdone it, we ask too much of politics. And politics assumes way too much. We need to really cut down and give the creative forces in our country much more space, the companies, the entrepreneurs. And we have to liberate that. And we need to focus on what governments and also Europe should focus on. We can't regulate everything. Once we see that momentum and growth coming from that, I think the sentiment will also change. And the gap at the moment between what we want to do and what we're actually executing, that's the problem. And it's all about execution at the end of the day. It's not about what we want, should do, must do. Let's just do it. And let's not take a target picture that is so big that we can't execute, but let's really get moving. So I'm more on the positive side, and I see that momentum. And I think if you look at the leadership across Europe, including our Chancellor Merz and others, that I think gives me real hope.
Anu, you are from Finland originally, but you've lived more than half your life in America. Your husband, your children are American. You have a unique perspective, and I'm really interested to hear from you whether to answer this question. Is Europe breaking apart more or growing closer together at the moment, from your perspective in New York?
So I would say that the more Europe is de-risking externally, the more it needs to integrate internally. And that message is now being internalized in European capitals, it's being internalized in Brussels. So there is an understanding that we need more scale. And so I am very optimistic that we are pursuing a greater integration and taking the benefits of that integration. Obviously, there are Eurosceptic parties, there are constraints that many national leaders have, so most likely we will be seeing the coalitions of the willing, enhanced cooperation, some ways that we don't have the least willing member to set the speed for integration. But I think, Jamil, one that gives me also hope is that if you look at the public opinion surveys, the support for European integration is at record high. And that is again because of my other home country, the United States, because of Russia, because of these external threats, that European citizens are looking to Europe for a common solution. And I think that is something that the leadership now can just harness that support and convert that into real solutions.
Yeah, it's people joke the two men who have done more for European integration than anyone in history are Donald J. Trump and Vladimir Putin, perhaps. One of the hottest discussions in Brussels right now, if you can call any discussion in Brussels hot, but the hottest discussion right now over the last few days is this idea of a multi-speed European Union, the idea that in order to deal with the challenges of the world today, that we have to move away from total consensus building at the EU level, and we have to move to, let's say, core countries and then the outer countries. I like the way that my prime minister, I live in Belgium, so the separatist prime minister of Belgium, Flemish nationalist prime minister of Belgium, Bart de Wever, he describes it as the onion model. So you have the core of the onion, maybe the Benelux and a couple of others, and then layers of the onion going out. So another way to think of it, multi-speed or onion. Do you think that's, given where we are today, given the challenges and the pace of challenges that are coming, do the panelists, do you think that's the way forward? Some countries move ahead, others take their time, and there's opt-out, optionality for, so moving really the whole model of the EU away from this consensus.
Good question, but I would answer with the question, how many onions will there be? Because, for example, in defense, we will have Baltics, Nordics, Germany, Poland, maybe UK from outside Norway. This will be like defense onion. Sorry if I didn't mention any other country, but in technology, it probably will be once again certain Nordic countries, maybe Germany, so on. This will be technology onion. So in finances, different onions. So how many onions? So good luck with that onion.
We're maybe stretching the analogy slightly, but I hear what you're saying.
Sorry, I didn't want to overstretch it, but
I'm getting hungry by the way.
Yeah, okay. How many? But I would say that Europe is much better off being together. Even though we are different, this makes us stronger. Sometimes it's like with the human, you have to go certain elements through because, to be honest, everybody in Europe right now is waiting for certain elections. And I mentioned elections in Europe for the enlargement and for the different processes. So I would say that that makes us stronger, not weaker, that we are different, because our decision-making mechanisms are getting better, and I hope they won't go to, for example, like enhanced cooperation or Article 7. But this is not ruled out. So I ask again, how many onions should there be?
There you go. Madame Lagarde, what's your...
Tempting to go for the onion soup, but in a way it doesn't matter. But what matters a lot is that the leaders know that it is possible, and public opinion understands that it is possible. Look at what happened with the 90 billion loans that was decided by the leaders. Was that unanimous? No. 3 member states specifically were carved out for the purpose of this loan, but they could do it. So it's not an impediment, it's not a constraint, it's something that is preferable, you're right, but you can get away from it. If it doesn't work, well, 24 still works, and they can borrow and go to the market with the 90 billion loans that all those 24 feel very strongly about. So the fact that you can go for qualified majority, the fact that you can build coalition of the willing, I mean, you know, the legal aspects will be taken over by the lawyers. I think I'm a lawyer, I'm a reformed lawyer myself. Sometimes you have to move them a little bit to the side and let the political drive actually take the lead, but it is doable. Can I say a word about European preference? Because I'm just a bit concerned about that one. I think that it's an area where the policymakers must talk to the private sector. And they must understand, you know, whether the European preference will actually work for them to be as efficient as possible while keeping security as high as is necessary. And if you, I mean, we are in this wonderful setting at the Munich Security Conference. You can talk to the militaries, you can talk to the people in the defense sector. Many of them will tell you that yes, it's fine, but the preference perimeter must be large enough to have the best technology brought into the equipment that they make. And you can define your perimeter on the basis of the good partners and the real friends and exclude those that are not in that category.
Thank you. What is your sense of this moving to a more multi-speed or onion model?
I do understand why we're having this discussion and also the intellectual question. It's a means to an end. We're discussing the means. But what's the end? Does it mean which decision gets taken after that? Or is it just process? And why I'm saying this is, if the only way, what we need is speed in decision making. If that's the only way to make the right decisions, let's discuss it. But let's also agree what comes after that. Because what can happen is, just in this conversation, we are debating this for 1 year, and what else gets decided? Nothing happens. So is that the top priority? And just to give you one example, I'm absolutely with what Ms. Lagarde has said on Buy European. My personal view is, this is a very delicate territory. The best approach to support Buy European is give room for innovation in Europe. Give room for innovation. And the question is every policy making, has an important element in it, does this serve innovation? Does it make us better in producing own products? Get it to the market. That makes us competitive, that delivers growth, that makes Europe more attractive. That, I think, is one of the key questions we have, and that will solve Buy European. Not only will we buy European, others will buy European, because we will have the best products. And we have to catch up in so many areas, be it software, AI, and we don't have the time anymore. So I'm sitting here really worried what is going on. That's why I say, if we talk about change in governance, structures, process, okay, what is it that we want to use that for?
So I'm going to throw it back to you, actually, Minister, a little bit. I heard last night, I think it was IBM I was in a discussion about digital sovereignty, fascinating topic. And IBM gave these statistics that said 80% of the tech stack in Europe, according to their estimates, comes from the US and China. So I hear what you're saying, and you now run a ministry that's brand new, less than a year old. I would like to hear from you. What is your plan?
Well, we're on it, and we're working at it, and it of course is a process that takes time. So I'll give you a few examples. We are absolutely in the process of having RFPs out for cloud infrastructure, and we've changed the criteria. Where does this data sit? Who owns the software stack? How deep does it go? Who owns the encryption? Who runs the technology, etc.? And there are very encouraging signs where we have capable companies in Germany, in France, and other markets that we will support. The state has not played the role as a strategic customer, and we're changing this. This is one big area. If I look at compute capacity that we have been building, in the past months, we have actually celebrated massive investments, opened already fantastic compute capacities, facilities. We're just not talking about it enough. And so do we do that in other parts of Europe. We have actually fantastic unicorns in Europe. We have companies that can build foundation models on the generative side with pictures, motion pictures, like Black Forest Labs and others. We have robotics companies. Innovation also comes from the grassroots. So there is so much on the way where we play a very different role, and that gives me hope. Does that mean there is still a long gap to fill? Absolutely, but the only way to do is to get started and use the talent. And there is still so much innovation in all this space required. And let's be clear, we have absolute fantastic talents. Look at how many Europeans are in leading positions in tech companies in the US. Where were they educated? And we want to bring them back. Some of them are back, and the times has never been better for this. So just doing the role I'm doing is worth fighting for this, and that gives me actually a lot of energy.
Great.
Can I give you the feedback of a user? So at the European Central Bank and with all the national central banks around Europe, we're doing exactly the same thing. We've identified the list of criteria that actually give us control over the key data that we're moving a lot of data around with central banks. We are not going to have a hyperscaler of the size and the capacity as the big hyperscalers that are all American at the moment. But it doesn't mean to say that the hyperscalers have access to all your data. And we are purchasers. We have purchasing power. If we are together, all the national central banks, all the regulators based in Frankfurt, suddenly the hyperscalers in Redmond and other places say, oh, we need to change our structure. We need to have European partners. And you are right, Minister, there are fantastic partners that they can work with. So it's not a question of saying, you know, none of those guys, but how much access do they have? Do they need to be the custodian of all our data? Should they all be in the hands of a magistrate that suddenly decides that data have to be cut off or repatriated? Probably not. And this is doable.
Thank you. Very quickly, I want to...
Very quickly, there's one other aspect which sometimes gets lost in the translation in the discussion. There are also models where, say, hyperscalers these days deploy very sovereign structures in Europe. What means sovereign? Data safe, there is no switch to switch it off, and it's run by Europeans. And that is technology transfer. We get better through this. And we should also have the capacity to be pragmatic and practical in this. So the world is not just black and white. There are many colors. And we should use many of those, but with a clear compass, with a clear ambition for also own innovation.
Thank you. Anu, I'm going to ask the original question, but I'm also, so what do you think of this idea of the onion or multi-speed model? But also, I know that, first of all, you wrote a book, Digital Empires, I think it's called, also another book on this topic of who's going to win in the technological race in this current environment. And also, I wanted to push you and ask you a bit about deregulation, because it is a buzzword. In Brussels, apparently they're banned from using the word deregulation, but they use the euphemism simplification. And on this stage, or not this stage, but stages, I've tried to push European commissioners to trick them into saying deregulation, and they won't. They literally will not say the word, which I find hilarious. But please, Anu, tell those three questions. Thank you.
So on the first one, I am pragmatist, I am for flexibility, so I think there is a solution to our urgency deficit that we need to be prepared, and as President Lagarde said, at least to know that there's an option, that we cannot be held hostage by those who are not supportive of those goals. But I think for the bigger question on deregulation simplification, I think it's very difficult to be against simplification. I think nobody's defending bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy. But what I fear is that we are fighting a wrong battle in many ways. What is holding the Europeans back is not that we are protecting digital rights. It's not the GDPR that explains why those tech giants are not coming from Europe, why they are coming from the US. I think there is a much bigger battle that we would need to be laser focused on. And that is, we already talked about the capital markets. About 5% of the global venture capital is in Europe, about 40% in China, 50% in the United States. That is a much more important issue to solve. The second issue, the integration of the single market. There was a really wonderful study from the European Central Bank that was quantifying the existing barriers to trade inside Europe. And it shows that if you attach them to tariff equivalence, there are around 60% tariff for trading goods in Europe, about 100% for trade in services. So while we're very worried about Trump's trade barriers, those are our barriers. We have erected them. We have failed to dismantle them. That ought to be our priority. Otherwise, the European tech companies cannot scale in Europe. Then Minister mentioned, and I think that was a really important point, global talent. The United States has been spectacularly successful in attracting the global talent to the US. And if you look at over $1 billion startups in the US, over 50% of them have an immigrant founder. Again, it is not because they don't have a federal privacy law that they are so successful. It is because the US has been the destination for that talent. And if I can add one more, the European legal barriers and attitudes to risk-taking. We have some of the most punitive bankruptcy laws in the world. And that really deters risk-taking because entrepreneurs, if you try to do something really difficult, innovate at the edge of the technological frontier, yes, sometimes you fail. But then you need to be given the second chance. There shouldn't be such legal consequences that are so severe or a cultural stigma associated with failure. This is something, again, that I observe Americans embrace a very different attitude. So I think if we now distract ourselves by fighting over how much we are deregulating, we are missing the real battle, which is really to build those fundamental pillars of the tech ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Anu. So now I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions. I would really appreciate if you can ask a question, not make a statement, please, or an advertisement. Thank you. We have somebody over here. Thank you.
Hi, Terry Reinke. I'm a member of the European Parliament, and following up on what you just said, I would make maybe the observation, I've been in the Parliament now for 11 years, and when we talk about the finalization of the single market, I always hear from member states in an abstract sentiment that it's great, but when we actually talk about doing something, then suddenly all these doubts come about. So my point would be, isn't the problem that we are dealing with in the European Union right now not that we have too much regulation, but that we have too many directives. Too many directives that are being translated in completely different ways in 27 member states that make it indeed impossible for companies to do business across the European Union. So would you be ready, now we want to finalize the European single market, would you be ready in fields like energy, in fields like the Capital Markets Union to actually go ahead and also fight in your own member states if there are doubts or if there are problems to get this through, because we need to finalize the single market. This is the most, I think it's an unsharpened diamond that we have in Europe. We are not using it enough, so we have to work on this. And will you be ready to also fight for this in your respective member states?
Shall I ask the Prime Minister of Estonia to answer?
Absolutely, we are fighting for that every day, probably. But I have a couple of points to that. First of all, usually when the Stats talks about one market, it's Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi had different reports, and Letta's idea is already one market, not even single market. But when you start to talk about it, usually everybody says, oh, that's a good idea. That's a very good idea. And then they say, but let's have this regulation like ours, and this is not good, and so on. And as you asked, you have to fight for it every day, to be honest. But I would add a couple of points also that for Estonia, we have 100% of digital services, not maybe 99%. You can get divorced and married in Estonia online. With the marriage, you have to show up. But, you know, we have very good infrastructure. Startups like to be there and so on, but we're a small country. And when you scale up, you look for the countries which have less rules. Europe has too many rules, also in digital market and so on. So it's still about regulating something we don't know. Because, for example, we started an Estonian AI, this kind of ecosystem, with guys from Skype, Bolt, and you know these companies. This year, 1/3 of our kids already use AI in school curricula. In 3 years, everybody will be using it. I don't know, will it be an like electric bike, you just pedal, go faster, but you can use it, not to be shy about it. But if we want to scale this up, will it happen in Europe right now? I would doubt it, because we have too many rules. You can have different experiments done in Asia, in the United States, so everything should be much more simple here, much more simple. We don't have the lack of capital, to be honest. I would say that. Yeah, but not with the barriers. No.
There's a gentleman at the back there, and then I'll come to you.
Do you mind if I address
sure,
this? So resounding yes to what you just said, and I think it's time to remove the gold. What do I mean by that? Nothing to do with gold. But the gold plating that we see in all these directives is unbelievable. So it's going to require courage to remove as much of it, but regulations, yes, by all means, more than directives. Can I just follow up? Thank you for quoting the ECB research paper on these internal barriers that we impose on ourselves. I think in terms of trend, that's where we need to go, remove as much of it. I don't think that we will remove all of it, because there are national preferences, cultural preferences. I'm not sure that I would regard cheese from other member states as the same level as my French cheese. So this is something that exists, and that
Always comes back to French cheese. That's the
no,
EU. That's what it's all about.
You started with the onions. You need a bit of cheese for that.
Thank you. We have a question.
Thank you. My name is Liam Byrne. I'm the chairman of the Business and Trade Committee in the House of Commons. So can I just push the panel on how we accelerate the scale-up finance that we need in Europe? I think the Cookies-Neuer report gave us a really nice analysis of how we actually have an abundance of long-term savings in Europe. We have an abundance of innovation. We have a real shortage of scale-up finance. And I think we owe a debt to the Cookies-Neuer team for setting out some practical examples of how we fix that problem in Europe. I think we've got to be slightly careful that we don't end up with a made-in-Europe response for scale-up finance. Actually, I think for the Remainers and pro-Europeans amongst us in the UK, we can see some real advantages to combining those ideas with a UK track too. But I'm sure there is a wider play there by mobilizing long-term savings across the European space, and indeed those markets that share our values, in order to really accelerate the scale-up finance that we're going to need. So I'd be interested in practical ideas on that, but I guess I'm also interested in how do we actually work this through together as policymakers over the course of the next 9 to 12 months.
Minister, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, I think obviously we have to tap into the long-term savings in Europe and find a way. I think the discussions that I'm witnessing are, for the first time, at least it feels to me, promising. Secondly, I think the key element, and that could be short-term, that we give stronger signals to attract simply more capital. Too much in Europe at the moment is public funded, and it doesn't leverage the private money sector. And that brings me back to regulation. Let me be very clear. I would ever advocate for laissez-faire. We have values, and that's a key differentiator. But policymakers need to make the effort from an abstract level to then go down to the painstaking details of what the machine produces. And there is a real disconnect. So when I say, oh, that directive is intentionally very good, I agree. Then let's go through the 100 pages and let's listen to the people who have to execute on it. And every single company that I meet, every single startup, every investor tells me, coming from the details, where the problem lies. If we bring it back to the abstract level, we all agree and there is no need. But the reality is that, I'll give you one example. One of the most important applications, I would say, that serves humanity in AI is actually medicine. And our GDPR at the moment makes it so hard for companies. Data that is anonymous. We can't use here. Companies have told me, and I've gone to the US, where they train the models there and the technology is developed there. Where's the competitive advantage? Nothing can happen, and we have other laws that forbid the abuse of that. So let's move from abstract to practicality. And whilst I have a lot of time to say we agree in principle, but we lost the plot in terms of when it comes to execution, notwithstanding the fact that we have so many directives, so many acts that offers so much, creates so much confusion in the community. And I think our customers at the end of the day are the citizens, are the voters, and also the companies, because they also vote. And we should listen to them. And I think there is a disconnect. That's why I say one of the elements is if we cut down on the red tape that is really standing in the way, we will see capital flow in much, much more. We will then have much more leverage to accelerate the discussion how we can actually also tap into European capital, which hopefully will also flow in and will be used, because a lot of capital is flowing elsewhere, and that should stay here in Europe. But that's why I advocate values are important. Regulation is not per se bad, but the way we've done it, we have overdone it, and that's why I advocate very much for a big change in Brussels, and including the member states, because gold plating needs to also stop there.
Thank you very much. There's a gentleman here. If we could get him the microphone. Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. My name is Ümit Kaya and I work for the German software company SAP. And we don't create bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, but bureaucracy has a strong agency, and we invented this on this continent. So how do we balance? Every time we face a problem in Europe, we come up with the first idea that we come up with, create another bureaucracy. So how do we give the agency back to the decision makers, dear Minister, because you mentioned speed and decision making. And how do we face this dilemma? Thank you.
If I only had the answer to how to actually do it, but I think we have to be honest. There are different views where a lot of people, also in Brussels, in member countries, think we know the answer and we have to tell everyone. And I think the creative potential of people, based on the right values, they can unleash so much potential. So the new government, or 9 months in office, the government in Germany is really changing that we say we want to have much more freedom for innovation, for companies to come up with the right things. Obviously, we need to test products, they have to be safe, and they should be based on values. And I think the new technology, there will be a lot of demand if we do it the European way. But let's give way to innovation and give much more power back to the creative forces that we have in our countries. And we are not doing ourselves a favor, because politics, there's too much demand on politics. We can't fulfill that given the speed. So it will be a question of survival, in my view, for also the democratic system. We have to balance what politics can do and what I think the market should solve.
So the Prime Minister Anu and Madame Lagarde all would like to follow up.
Okay. I would suggest we change the order of things. In economics, there's a proverb saying that what works, don't touch it. So maybe we should try this way, that if it works, we at first don't regulate it, because if you start regulating something that is starting to grow, for sure, it won't grow. That's quite clear. In Estonia, we have also this kind of program with entrepreneurs. I don't know how it's in Germany, but we have this kind of program with entrepreneurs that our Chamber of Commerce, Employees Union, and so on, they themselves are responsible for cutting red tape and getting rid of bureaucracy. And it's working well, to be honest. We have had in 1 year more than 700 proposals. Most of them are already calculated. Some of them are in Parliament. Some of them are sent to European Commission. So if the client is responsible also for getting rid of the red tape, it also works. So 2 things. Change the order of things and get the client involved.
Thank you. Anu, you wanted to...
So I don't think 27 bureaucracies is better than one bureaucracy. So I completely agree with this idea that regulations are often better than directives. What we also need, that we need the Commission that really assumes the role that should be its role, which is that it's a guardian of the treaties. And it goes after the member states that are infringing their obligations, that are erecting new barriers. Because many of those barriers that the European Central Bank also identified, they are national governments, national bureaucracies, imposing their own rules on the top of some European rules. And what we've seen, really interestingly, since 2004, a massive decline in those infringement proceedings, which are the Commission cases against the member states that are an impediment to the single market. So we need to reinvigorate also the Commission's role to enforce the European rules so that we can have the single market that is a smooth and seamless for companies to do business in.
So to your question, I think that, and it's well known, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Hence, if you need a radical change, you don't ask the bureaucrats in the national member states or in Europe, and I respect all of them, you don't ask them to reduce the volume because it's their added value. That's what they regard as added value. Second, you have to change the incentives. They are talented, competent people, but change the incentives so that they don't feel good because they bring to their commissioner a new proposal, a new text, something that will eventually have the name of the commissioner attached to it. That's the wrong approach. You know, there was a very good, excellent commissioner, an Italian gentleman, who said to me, you know, one way to reduce by half the regulation coming out of Brussels is have 1 out of 2 commissioners' meetings removed. You will divide by 50%. I think he was overstretching it, but the incentives are in the wrong place at the moment. The same happens at the national level.
We're basically out of time, and I'm going to seize my privilege and prerogative as the moderator to ask you, Madame Lagarde, your term comes to an end officially, or should come to an end officially, in October 2027, and I'm interested whether you're planning to move to Paris next from Frankfurt, to Geneva, or to Brussels. And what I mean by that is, are you going to run for the presidency of France? Are you going to run the World Economic Forum, or are you going to be the Council President of the EU?
I'll check where my grandchildren are located, and then I'll decide.
I was hoping to make a headline, obviously, but you're too well trained for that. So thank you very much to my amazing panel. Thank you all to the audience. Thank you to the Munich Security Conference. We look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you.